It happened about a year ago. I'm a Marine stationed at Camp Pendleton, California. Now believe me, I've seen some horrifying things in combat that a lot of people couldn't even fathom, but nothing compares to what I saw that chilling night in the woods near the base. There are nights when sleep just simply doesn't come. Some nights are swallowed up by the thoughts of past experiences. Some are simply a restlessness embedded in my bones. One such sleepless night sent me wandering off towards the dense woods at about 2 a.m. Now, I've been in this area multiple times during drill practice, but the darkness of the night added a hushed mystery that wasn't there during the daylight hours. As I was walking and savoring the quietness, about 400 feet from the training ranges, I heard a strange sound. It was somewhere between a hoot and a grunt, and it echoed through the air and dissolved into the night. After the last echo faded, a silence more profound than the previous one ensued, and it gave me an itching sensation of anxiety which was strange because I've been trained to handle nerve-wracking situations. At first, I shrugged it off as stillness. That's when I smelled it. A fetid stench, like rotten eggs and damp fur mixed together. The putrid scent just about knocked me off my feet. After serving for quite a few years and standing through countless ad hoc latrine duties, I found myself gagging. Suddenly, a rustling noise from the tree line to my left snapped me out of the stench-related shock. Now a Marine knows when he should stay put, and when he should back away, and my gut knew this was a retreat situation. I remained still, my gaze fixed on the seemingly harmless trees. I could hear my heart pound, each throb echoing in my ears louder than the last. The rustling persisted, and then the branches parted. It stepped into the moonlight. I flinched at the looming figure, my mind toggling between reality and questioning the darkness. The figure that stood half-hidden in the semi-darkness was massive, about 8 feet tall and terrifyingly robust. It was covered in dark matted hair that was slick with an unidentifiable fluid. Its eyes, glowing ominously in the dim light, were the very embodiment of dread. By the time it moved, a slow, menacing sway, my instinct screamed a word at me: Bigfoot. My training kicked in, and I quietly retreated, trying not to alert the creature of my presence. Once I was out of the line of sight, I sprinted back to the base. Stern serenity pervaded the base, which appeared surreal after my eerie encounter. I turned back to see if it had followed me. It hadn't. The woods loomed dark and daunting, the earlier tranquility shattered. In a profession nursed by danger, this was the kind of terror I'd never trained for. It left a lingering sensation of dread and fascination in my marrow. I returned to bed that night, but sleep never came. The image of the creature remained vivid, and the sounds haunting. Until now, I have not revisited the woods, nor have I caught sight of the creature again. But the encounter, compressed in that slice of time, is indelible and still sends waves of prickly trepidation through me, a feeling strong than any adrenaline-filled drill day. A strange sense of respect binds me to that creature and its realm. It was an encounter I'll surely not forget, a secret I'll carry till exhausted of breath, and a tale that's been added to the host of peculiarities I've experienced. Keep up the great work and stay safe. I hope this finds you well. My name is John, and I've served as a Marine for the past 10 years. I've seen some unimaginable things in my time overseas, but what I'm about to share with you stands out for its terrifying and unexplainable nature. This encounter occurred during a recreational trip to the Ouachita National Forest, west of Hot Springs, Arkansas, in 2015. The day had started off normally, with a few of my military buddies and I retreating to the forest for some well-deserved downtime. I'm sure you're aware, the Ouachita National Forest is known for its impressive recreational opportunities with hiking, fishing, and camping top on the list. We'd secured permission to camp near the Talamena Scenic Drive area, where the expansive views of the wilderness were unparalleled. Around midday, we'd set our little camp up near a creek, a perfect location that provided a resupply of fresh water when needed. After a hearty lunch, the guys decided to fish while I opted for a light nap. My nap was cut short by a ferocious shake, followed by sudden disorientation as if I was caught in a tremor. The tent was shaking violently, shattering my peaceful sleep, jolting me to high alert. As a Marine, I was used to reacting quickly in uncommon situations, but nothing had prepared me for what I saw when I hastily exited my tent. A massive, hairy creature, standing upright with dirt-encrusted fingers, snapping a branch from a nearby tree as if it were a toothpick. The creature had a burly physique. Its height rivaled the tallest trees. My heart pounded against my ribcage as my mind slowly registered what I was seeing. Neglecting to breathe, I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, the creature's powerful, peculiar odor filling my nostrils. Its smell was a hideous mix of wet dog, skunk, and something indescribable. I had a gut-wrenching feeling that my 8-hour combat training had been feebly inadequate for the situation I was now facing. I was always a skeptic when it came to stories of Bigfoot or such creatures. Never did I buy into those fanciful tales told around campfires. Yet, here I was, witnessing the legend right in front of my eyes. The creature pointedly ignored my presence, continuing its bizarre destruction of the tree. Then abruptly, it ceased its activities and turned to look at me. Damn if our eyes didn't meet, causing an inexplicable shudder to race through my body. Its eyes, they were intelligent, almost human. Those eyes glinted with an understanding that was unsettling, after which the creature grunted and then lumbered off into the dense forest foliage. I stood in stunned silence, my mind grappling with the enormity of what had just occurred. I only regained my wits when my friends returned, their joyful banter shattering the eerie quietness. Their faces turned from shock to disbelief when I recounted what had happened. To no surprise, they thought I was spinning a yarn, their skepticism well justified, given the matter at hand. Fast forward to a night a few weeks ago. I was at home, reliving what can only be termed a close encounter of the Bigfoot kind. The National Geographic Channel featured a documentary about Bigfoot sightings. The chilling resemblance to my encounter hit hard, validating the experience, lending credibility to my harrowing tale. Given my military discipline and training, my mind operates on hard facts and logic. Yet this encounter continues to send shockwaves through my system. The reality is, I saw Bigfoot that day in the Ouachita National Forest. There's no doubt about it. There was intelligence in those eyes that neither an animal nor man could replicate. Not many would believe my story, and as a staunch realist, I don't blame them. But as a Marine, I'm trained to trust my instincts and observations. And on that day, my instincts told me that I'd come face to face with Bigfoot. The experience was traumatic and real. The image of the creature, its smell, and those eyes, they're imprinted in my memory. Thank you for giving me a platform to share my story. Hopefully this account lends credibility to similar stories told by others. I can vouch that these aren't just tall tales spun around campfires. They're actual encounters, felt deeply by those lucky, or unlucky, depends on how you see it, to experience them. My name is Jack Thompson, and I'm a U.S. Marine, currently stationed at the Marine Corps Base Camp, Pendleton, California. I have a strange encounter to share that happened at the Los Padres National Forest, a place I've always loved trekking. It all started during one of my improvised fishing expeditions in mid-September. I've always enjoyed the calmness of fishing alone, particularly at night, when the forest resonates with a distinctive mystique whisper. Around midnight, while I was at the bend of the Big Sur River, I heard an odd sound behind me, as though a huge creature was rustling through the brush. Now, I've spent countless nights in the wilderness, heard all sorts of animals, but this sound, it was different. It was unnerving. Swiftly, I turned around to check. From the dim moonlight and the flickering glow from my campfire, I could see this daunting creature, about 7, 8 feet tall, covered from head to toe with coarse reddish-brown hair. The shocking part was its silhouette, unmistakably human-like. But was it a human? Nah, much too large for that. Was it a grizzly? Nope. Too human-like. What was this monstrosity doing in the peaceful Big Sur River? The proverbial light bulb went off as a chill seized me. It had to be the legendary creature, Bigfoot! Before my mind could forge a plan, I saw it stepped into the river, water reaching its knees. Its eyes shone a threatening red when caught in the firelight. The creature was massive, its chest broad and muscular, its arms large and strong. Fascination wrestled with fear as I held my ground, not daring to move a muscle. This colossal entity, seemingly unbothered by my presence, took a look at me, our eyes locking for what felt like an eternity. I could swear there was a human-like intellect reflecting against its eyes. It was surely not an ordinary beast. and then as quickly as it came, it moved away. It lumbered off into the forest, disappearing into the obscurity with a speed that belied its massive size. I continued to listen until the eerie silence of the wilderness returned. Seeing that it was gone and wasn't coming back, I slowly started packing my things, putting some healthy distance between myself and the hypothetical home of Bigfoot. My quiet fishing night had turned into a thrilling, spine-tingling encounter with a being as mythical as it is controversial. I've shared this experience with a few Marine buddies, and although most of them just gave me a "sure you did" smirk and a thoughtful "you need less beer, Thompson," some expressed an introverted fascination about my encounter, perhaps remembering other stories they've heard, or even their own encounters. Sharing my experience here, hoping that those combing virtual records, trying to piece together the puzzle of Bigfoot's existence, can find a piece in my account. Remember, the world is full of mysterious and unexplained incidents that remind us there is more to Earth than what meets the eye. I'd like to share my eerie encounter that I experienced during my time as a Marine at the Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. The incident still leaves me scratching my head and questioning the very nature of the world we live in. Reading through the posts on your site has given me the courage to share my own story. I'm not seeking validation or even answers, but more so offering another piece to this puzzle that we can't seem to solve. I remember it was the winter of '08, the middle of January. Impossible to forget. Anyone who ever experienced North Carolina's winter would know the chill would bite through your bones, and the nights, especially those, were mercilessly long and dark. We had just wrapped up fire and maneuver exercises around the Neuse River area, and I was heading back with my unit to the base camp. It was past twilight. The darkness had seeped into every corner of the woods. My buddies, Coldwell and Ochoa, were gabbing away in the HMMWV, High Mobility Multi-Purpose Wheeled Vehicle, about the weekend plans, their voices nothing but background noise in my head. The incident occurred while we were driving along Highway 24, close to where it connects with Bell Fork Road. An expanse of forest flanks the route, and I always used to enjoy gazing through the thick tapestry of pines. But that night was different. Ochoa was driving at a steady speed of 60 miles per hour, the headlights of our vehicle slicing through the spectral darkness, when something dashed across the road ahead us. A large figure, bigger than any human or wildlife I'd seen around. Coldwell, sitting shotgun, howled out a surprised, "Holy hell! What is that?" Ochoa jammed on the brakes, plunging us forward as the HMWV screeched to a halt. The dust kicked up around us, swallowing the dark figure that had now stalled on the other side of the road under the dim yellow glow of the street lamp. Silence settled inside the vehicle as we squinted through the windshield at whatever was standing there, in the intersection. It stood upright. 2 legs, 2 arms, mirroring a human yet distorted in proportions. Whatever it was colossal, easily around 7 to 8 feet tall. The figure was cloaked with a rough, unkempt coat of hair, which shone under the light like copper against rustic paper. After what felt like an eternity, the creature bolted towards the dense woods, its strides wide and throbbing, like it was born to tread these grounds. We sat there, frozen stiff, until Ochoa finally muttered, "Holy Mother of Jesus, did we just see a freaking Bigfoot?" There was something unsettling about the ordeal, like a bad melody playing on loop. Though we talked about it amongst ourselves, the incident never made it up the chain of command. Either they wouldn't believe us, or worse, they'd think we were screwing around. As Marines, we've all seen the thick and thin of life. We've been trained to handle threats, be alert, adaptable, and resilient. But that incident, it threw us for a loop. I can't say for sure what it was we saw that night, but I'll tell you this. It wasn't no dang bear or some fancy optical illusion. It spooked me enough to avoid the Highway 24 route when heading back. The only thing that I contemplated was the sheer indifference the creature portrayed towards us. It never looked or made any sound. It just crossed, almost like it didn't register our existence, or simply didn't care. An apex creature wandering through its kingdom. And thus ends my tale. I've since retired from the military, but the memory of that odd experience never left me. We saw something that night, something that remains elusive till today, transcending conventional explanations. These are woods, friend, and I believe they hold more secrets than we could possibly comprehend. Thanks for listening, or rather reading. Keep the lantern of curiosity burning, mate. We never know what we might stumble upon. I've been an active member on your site for a few years now, mostly as an observer, listening to other people's encounters with the unexplained and the weird. Being a Marine, I've traveled quite a bit and have had my fair share of strange experiences, but it wasn't until a trip to the secluded forests of Nevada that I truly had my understanding of the world shaken. We're trained to operate under high-pressure situations, to keep our cool in the face of danger, but let me tell you, no amount of training can prepare you for the feeling of coming face-to-face with something beyond explanation. It was during a training exercise in the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest, famous for being the largest national forest in the lower 48 states. As expected, it was mostly remote and desolate. Late one night, under the cover of darkness, we had set up camp at the edge of a clearing, with thick, impenetrable forest around us. As I was tending to the fire, I heard what sounded like footsteps coming from the dense woods behind me. Dismissing it as just another late-night critter, I continued stoking the fire. And then, something didn't feel right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and my gut screamed at me to pay attention. I immediately signaled my team to keep quiet. We sat there, in hushed silence, listening to the night. Then it happened again. Not just a rustle this time, but something heavy, pressing down the underbrush, snapping dry twigs under its weight. The sound started to get closer and closer, each crunch louder than the last. Suddenly the undergrowth erupted, right on the tree line. A dark figure emerged towering over us, easily measuring 8, 9 feet. Now I ain't a cowardly man, never have been. I've been face to face with insurgents who'd like nothing more than to put a bullet in my head. But this was different. Fear, true primal fear gripped me, squeezing air out from my lungs. It was monstrous, hairy, and had a set of glowing eyes that bored straight into us. It made a sound, a kind of growl that resonated in the pit of my stomach. Then, faster than anything of that size ought to move, it barreled into the wilderness, leaving us in shocked silence. For a moment, none of us moved. Then, as if on cue, we all booked it back to our vehicles, leaving our equipment behind. We blazed through the forest roads, half expecting to see the creature pursuing us, but it never did. We finally managed to escape the forest by dawn, thankful to see the concrete civilization again. I still don't know what we saw, but something tells me it's still out there, lurking in the shadows of the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest. It's been a good few years since that night, but frankly, it's something that gets burned into your memory, makes it kinda hard to forget. Anyway, that's my story. Just thought I would finally share it with people who could understand. Thanks for listening. Or in this case, reading. I'm a Marine, been one for as long as I can recall, landed in pretty much every corner of the globe, and seen a bunch of stuff in my career. But not everything I've ever seen could be explained with logic, or even our modern knowledge of science. There's one incident that puts everything else to shame, as it's not exactly the kind of thing you'd expect a Marine like me would encounter. So here it is, my bizarre encounter with something abnormal by the Toro Weep overlook of Grand Canyon, Arizona. So there I am, off for a solo camping trip. Now most of you might ask why a solo trip, but that's what Marines do. We seek out solitude. Now the thing with the Toro Weep overlook is, it's remote. I mean extremely remote and a rugged location, just the way I like it. Yet it's scenic, the mighty Colorado River slicing through eons-old geological formations. The day I arrived was as normal as it could get. A tedious long drive on a dirt road, an evening spent in setting up my camp, and a whole lot of anticipation of the peace that was to come. But let me tell you something about peace. It's often elusive when you're least expecting it to be. That night, as I was about to call it a day, I started hearing weird noises coming from the north. Being a Marine, my training instantly kicked in. I picked up my flashlight and headed north, following the peculiar sounds. Now, this wasn't any ordinary sound. It was a cross between a deep howl and an eerie moan, the likes of which I had never heard before. The air around me seemed to thicken, and a wet fog started to roll in, making everything look somewhat like a scene straight out of a horror flick. I pressed on, despite feeling shaken to the core. This is no small feat, you know, for someone who's seen actual combat. But then, life surprises us at the weirdest of moments. Suddenly the air grew denser, and before I knew it, I was standing, frozen, staring at this gigantic figure, lit dimly by the distant moonlight. Now I'm a big guy, but this thing was enormous, at least 7 feet tall, something physically powerful that just exuded raw strength. I could feel its hot breath, see the glowing red eyes, and smell a pungent mixture of wet fur and damp earth. Like a deer caught in the headlights, I just stood there, unable to make a move, not allowing myself to believe what lay in front of my eyes. That's when the creature opened its mouth and gave out a deafening roar, unlike anything I had ever heard, something that resonated through the deserted canyon. And then, it was gone, disappeared into the thick fog. The walk back to the camp was like walking on thin ice, every step echoing in my head like a thunderclap. I packed up as quickly as I could and left before the first rays of sunshine could hit the canyon floor. It's been years since that coldish November night. I've been back to Torweep Overlook once, with a team of fellow Marines this time, but never encountered that creature again. To this day, I'm not sure of what I saw. I've heard of bears in the Grand Canyon, but that was no bear. I don't expect folks to just believe my story, but it's not a tale. It's what I have experienced. Even now, I can recall that night with a fervor, enough to make my guts do a little jig inside me. So that's it, my encounter with the impossible. That's my tale. Take it as you will. Life can surprise us in ways we could never imagine, and not everything we see fits the mold of the norm. In the grand scheme of things, we are just mere spectators to the infinity of mysteries that life, or shall I say, the universe unfolds in front of us. I hope this email finds you well. My name is Andy, and I'm a Marine based out of Camp Pendleton in Southern California. I've seen some pretty hair-raising things in my time, but nothing can really compare to the encounter I had just last month. I thought I'd share my story with your audience, and it's an experience that has changed my perspective on a lot of things. I don't normally associate myself with the supernatural, but this story has a nature that seems to fall squarely in that camp. Let's dive straight in. March is usually a quiet month for us, with the usual drills and exercises. Occasionally, we head out for outdoor training in the forest of the beautiful Cleveland National Forest. During one of these exercises, we set up camp for the night near Ortega Highway. There I was, sharing ghost stories and the day's laughs with my brothers in arms over a simmering campfire. We felt a sense of camaraderie, that special bond only soldiers know. It was just one of those quintessential Marine evenings, filled with stories of bravado and lots of canned beans. And then, it happened. As the night grew darker, I began to hear a rustling sound not far from us, like something big moving through the bush. Whatever it was seemed to have some weight to it. The noises were too deliberate, too pronounced, to be brushed off as the wind playing tricks. My training has taught me to trust my instincts, so I immediately alerted the team. They scoffed at first. I was the one sharing ghost stories after all. But then the rustling started again. This time louder, this time closer. My heart pounded and a cold sweat ran down my face as my eyes darted around, trying to penetrate the near-total darkness. The last time I felt such adrenaline pumping through my veins was when I was on my first patrol. We picked up our gear, night vision goggles donned, rifles at the ready, and steeled ourselves for whoever, or whatever, was out there. And then, we heard it. A loud, gut-wrenching growl that came from the same direction as the rustling. The sound pierced the quiet night and echoed around us, sending goosebumps shooting up my arms. I could tell from the uneasy looks of my battle-hardened companions that this was no ordinary situation. My pulse roared in my ears as we moved in a careful formation towards the direction of the sound. I felt as if the world around me was contracting, focusing on this one moment. In the beam of our flashlights, we saw tall trees broken in half as though a giant just brushed them aside like nothing, leaving a trail of destruction. I'd never really believed in the existence of creatures like Bigfoot, but the size and shape of the tracks left behind, and the musky, animalistic scent that hung in the air, was enough to make a believer out of me. We didn't actually get to see any creature that night, and after searching for some time, the eerie sounds disappeared. But from the evidence alone, it was clear to us that whatever we had encountered was no ordinary animal. Since that incident, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sends a flash of fear through us. The strange encounter on that eerie night is forever etched in my mind. I'm writing this to your website in hopes of finding others who have had similar experiences, and perhaps some kind of explanation. As Marines, we are trained to face the scariest of situations head-on. But that night in the Cleveland National Forest taught us there are some things that military training just doesn't prepare you for. I just needed to get it out there. You're not going to believe this, but as Sergeant First Class in the Marines, I've got this figured those who have trained for combat are much more likely to see things for what they are plainly. Even then, some things unnerve us. Forgive me if this story turns out lengthy, but I need to get this off my chest. It was in the tail end of 2010 when I was stationed in Camp Pendleton, California. I am a San Diego native. My family has lived there for generations, and I've always known the areas around Camp Pendleton like the back of my hand. So naturally, when I got stricken with insomnia during my service, I took late-night strolls outside the base to unwind. This one particular night, it was just past 2 a.m. I bundled up, left the warmth of my bunk, and decided to wander towards the Santa Margarita River, a beacon of tranquility in the dead of the night. The river always had been a place of calm for me, with the occasional cricket orchestra and the rustle of wild hares in the underbrush. Tonight, though, there was something different in the air. A mighty silence, as if nature had taken a pause, held her breath. I treaded carefully, down the paved road, up to the winding dirt trail that led to the river. My combat boots crunched frost-bitten autumn leaves underfoot, and that was the only sound slicing the thick silence. Shivers crept up my spine, niggling the back of my neck, but I shook them off, telling myself I've seen worse in tours far more dangerous. As I reached the riverbank, moonlight sheen on the slow-moving river, and sparse clouds hovering around gave a surreal cast to everything. My sight landed on a large figure on the other side of the river, moonlight hitting slick, long strands of hair on its back. At first I thought it could be a bear, standing on its hind legs, pawing at something on a tree. But then the bear turned around, and I froze in my trail. Facing towards me was not a bear, but an upright figure for which I can only use the term Bigfoot. It was massive for a human, or any known local wildlife, probably 9 feet tall, covered from top to bottom with this grizzly-like hair. That was my first thought, that the rumors, the strange whispers around our campfire could be true. Fellow Marines regaled us newcomers with tales of the Pendleton ape, sort of a camp legend, an unseen presence that supposedly lurked in the hills and forests around the base. Now, any sane Marine wouldn't think twice about it, simply pegged it as a joke. Tell that to a Marine staring stone still at a creature that could only be out of some freakish legend, on the opposite bank of a river, with nothing but some 200 feet of slow-moving water in between. It just stood there, staring right back at me. Any feeling of unease I had felt earlier was replaced with raw dread, my mind playing fight-or-flight scenarios. Thoughts raced through my mind. Do I stand my ground? Risk a confrontation? Or do I retreat quietly? Could it swim? I must have stood there for a lifetime, engrossed in a stare down with the creature. It gave one last hard gaze, turned around and ambled into the wilderness, leaving behind echoes of its heavy footsteps. Once it was out of sight, I found my feet, turned around and started back to base at a brisk pace, the dread still lingering in my gut. Telling the battalion was out of the question. No one would believe me, or worse, they'd make it into another campfire anecdote. I kept the account to myself, playing it over and over in my head, my insomnia soaring heights in the following days. This incident remains etched in my Marine memories, sharing a place with my combat stories. So, that's my story. One that I've held on to for years, a wild encounter that still gives me a flutter of fear in my stomach as I recount it. You can take it or leave it, I just needed to get it out there. I've been holding on to this story for a while, but after coming across your website, I feel it's finally time to share it. In light of life's current unpredictable twists and turns, I think it's relevant to share this uncanny experience. I'm a Marine, and this incident happened in 1998 when I was stationed in Quantico, Virginia. This takes place on the sprawling grounds of Marine Corps Base Quantico, a place that's a hot pot of military activity intermingled with vast stretches of wilderness. Oddly enough, there's an eerie beauty to it. Just across the Potomac River is the Occoquan Bay National Wildlife Refuge, making the area a sanctuary for wildlife. One weekend, my buddy Johnson and I got the bright idea to venture into the wooded areas around the base. We were two adventurous Marines seeking an adrenaline rush, the standard macho stuff. We decided to take a hike through the forests, armed with flashlights, trail snacks, and a sense of false bravado that young Marines often mistake for courage. We were out to face the unknown with little regard for what the night might bring. The night was inky, and the woods dense. About an hour into our trek, we began hearing loud cracks resonating around us, like someone breaking thick branches or hitting tree trunks with a baseball bat. It sent an unfamiliar jolt of fear rocking through my body. I wasn't the type to scare easily, but something felt off. The woods were stirring with an energy that felt unnatural. We paused, strained our ears, and there it was again. Another cracking sound. Now I've heard many sounds in those woods, but nothing like this. It was a clear wood on wood. Crack, 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 echoing in crisp succession, seemingly answering an unseen caller. Something was out there, answering or communicating. Whether folly or bravery, we decided to investigate. Warily, we headed toward the sound, gripping our flashlights tighter, our false bravado crumbling in the face of the unknown. Every rustle, crackle, and whisper of the wind seemed amplified, shooting tendrils of raw fear through our hearts. We'd faced the rigors of basic training, the stern eyes of drill sergeants, and yet, at that moment, we felt a fear beyond comprehension, the fear of an unknown adversary. Suddenly, cutting through the silence of the night, we heard another sound. It was unmistakable, a rock being slammed against another. The clack, clack, clack sound chilling us to the bone. It was an intelligent being, whatever it was, capable of using tools or manipulating its surroundings. I remember thinking to myself, is this some kind of sick joke? An initiation prank for the newbies? We paused, waiting for a laugh from the underbrush, the relief of knowing it was a fellow Marine. But the silence was deafening. The chilling silence stretched on, and I swear my heart was pounding loud enough to be its own echo. We felt defenseless, our flashlights rendered useless against the cloak of the night. It wasn't Marine versus Marine, it was man versus the unknown. That realization hit hard, like a freezing wave, stripping away any residual bravado, leaving naked fear in its place. In the end, we did what any sane Marine would do. We hightailed it out of those forsaken woods, back to the safety of the base, our fear fueling our flight. Once back, we shared our experience with our unit, and of course they laughed it off, chided us for spooking at the sounds of the forest or blamed it on a couple of too many beers. But Johnson and I knew what we had heard and felt. It was no prank or trick of the mind. It was not something that could be laughed off. Yes, call us crazy or call it a figment of our overactive imaginations, but it was an experience that still to this day manages to send a jarring chill through my body when I recall it. But he and I, we maintain our silence about the incident mostly, respecting the unspoken bylaw of military brotherhood. You don't earn your stripes by recounting ghost stories. Over the years, I've tried reasoning with the event. I mean, we were in a highly secured military base with monitored perimeters and all that jazz, so what could it possibly have been? Then there were times when I thought, could it be? Could Bigfoot actually exist? The idea seemed far-fetched. However, the more I brushed it off, the stronger the memory of the event loomed in my mind. Marine training makes you grounded and observant. It creates a trust in your intuition that's hard to shake off. And in this case, it's my intuition that won't let me sleep peacefully. To rationalize, I often think that someone might have staged the whole thing. Maybe they slipped past the secured perimeters. Maybe it was a couple of kids from a neighboring community who thought it would be funny to scare a couple of Marines. However, none of these explanations sit well with me. They clash with the palpable sense of fear and the strange, gut-wrenching vibe we felt that night. I can't explain how in a military base surrounded by military personnel, I, a Marine, felt the most vulnerable and fearful. Years later, I bumped into Johnson at a reunion, and our conversation inevitably lingered to that unforgettable night. We had both aged, seen and done things, experienced life and death in ways only soldiers can understand. Yet even after all these years, the memory of that night still brings that electrifying sense of alarm, vibrating through us, a silent bond of an incredible, unexplained experience. This isn't just a case of an overactive imagination, or an exaggerated recount of a couple of scared kids. Since the Bigfoot craze has gained momentum, I can't help but question the reality of the situation. I can't help but wonder if that night, in those desolate woods in Quantico, if we did have a momentary brush with the unexplained. To date, that memory keeps me on my toes, makes me appreciate the power of the unknown. You can call it a Bigfoot encounter, or brush it off as an adrenaline-fueled delusion of a cocky Marine. But I can attest that whatever we encountered that night was something beyond our conventional understanding. Even the toughest soldiers can be reduced to mere mortals when faced with the uncanny, and that's a memory I'll carry to my grave.